Call this one the second of two parts, with the schedule release becoming official yesterday in the NFL. Had my live reaction, went over it with you in the moment, what I thought of the schedule. Today, it's time to put my money where my mouth is and make some predictions. Didn't do this last year because everything was so new, but this year going to take my shot at predicting exactly what the Seahawks record will be. That's coming up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Be sure to like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what I do as a full-time content creator. And if you like the content that I'm producing, maybe you could consider a more tangible way of donating to the cause and helping support the channel and me. You can do all of that down in the description. I've got all the links and the different ways that you could do that down below as well. Well, as I mentioned, last year, didn't get into this. Just didn't feel like there was enough information to go on. Too many unknowns. Brand new head coach for the first time, young, obviously, new offensive coordinator, new players, young roster, et cetera, et cetera. I did, however, if you'll recall, get carried away a little bit after the Monday night loss in Detroit. If you remember that game, that was the one where the Seahawks were missing their entire defensive line. Lots of players on defense missing in that game, and yet they gave the Lions a hell of a run on the road in the Dome. And I just felt coming out of that like the offense was trending in the right direction. It was coming together, and the defense was going to gel as soon as they got those guys back. So I did then call an audible and made a prediction after that game. Thought they were going to go 12-5. Obviously, I was off. I could not have foreseen the struggles in the run game, especially on defense, that the Seahawks were going to experience after that until they swapped out the linebackers, got into the bye week and all of that, and then we saw the transformation of the defense. That will be one of the factors that I take into account in making these predictions today, the things that we know and the things that we don't know. And this is the case with every single team in the league, right? And so we're having to obviously project, make some assumptions, and try to apply as much reason and rational thought and analysis to this as I can. As I tweeted out earlier today, the struggle I was having is I feel so good about the offseason the Seahawks had and how they're putting this roster together. And while it's not a perfect roster, neither is anyone else's. We could even take the Philadelphia Eagles roster that won the championship last year and poke some pretty significant holes in it. They had a lot of losses, as many Super Bowl champions do. And, you know, there are prognosticators out there who are just willing to overlook those losses, as they seem to be with the Washington Commanders. Tremendous amount of turnover on that roster, as they seem to be with the 49ers after a down year with some injuries. But they had some losses as well, some guys coming back off injury, some unknowns there. Completely different looking defense heading into the season. And yet most of the projections that we see, and I did a show on this last week, just how the Seahawks were kind of being, well, maybe not disrespected, but dismissed and overlooked by a lot of the national media. And that a lot of that kind of went hand in hand with, well, we're just willing to forgive and forget everything that we saw from the 49ers last year, and we just expect them to be back at the top of the heap. So there were a couple of things that I looked at in trying to be as objective as I could heading into this exercise. Try to lean more into the analyst side of my brain than the fan side of my brain. Not always easy. First of all, as I sought out some other projections, tried to incorporate some other people's opinions. And the timing was great because just in the last 2 days, Cynthia Freuland from NFL.com, who does such a tremendous job with analytics, and everything she does is based on computer models, right? And they just input all the data that they possibly can, you know, from all the different places, from their next gen stats and from, you know, EPA, and they take travel into account and rest and time of day. They project 53-man rosters for every team. And then she runs literally 1 million computer simulations that play out the entirety of the NFL season, 272 regular season games, and she plugs everything into the computer and runs it 1,000,000 times. And so what you tend to get a bell curve, right? There's a couple teams that stand out above the rest. The Eagles, Commanders, Lions, all projected with 10 or 11 wins. And then there's a whole bunch of teams that kind of fall between that 7.5 and 9.8 win range. That's just how these simulators are going to go. When you do it 1,000,000 times, you're going to get sort of the mean gets spread out a little bit. And I think a good example of this as well is someone's going to win 12 or 13 games, maybe 14. And yet she has the Eagles topping everybody with 11 wins, the Commanders and Lions also in that 10 to 11 win range. And then you get down into the NFC West. Again, as I just mentioned, she's got the 49ers at roughly 10 games, 9.9, the Rams 9.7 wins, the Seahawks and Cardinals both 8 wins. Now that doesn't seem all that unrealistic, given that many of us, if not most of us, seem to agree that the NFC West this year is going to be a very, very interesting dogfight. One that could go down to the very last couple of weeks. And, I'll get into my thoughts on each team as we go game by game and look at these projections and ultimately get my prediction. But a couple of things to keep in mind here. The 49ers definitely benefit from a last place schedule. Talked about this a little bit last night. Some of you, are kind of wringing your hands about how easy the 49ers schedule is. Well, it's 90, 85%, whatever, haven't done the math on it, the exact same schedule as the Seahawks. Obviously, time and date are different. But 14 of the 17 opponents are exactly the same because that's just how the schedule is made. It's those other 3 games that depend on where you finish in the division. And, the 49ers get to play the Giants, Browns, and Bears as their 3 versus the Seahawks. I think those same games are replaced by the Steelers. Of course, I didn't write this down, but their 3 teams are based on a second place schedule. So they're playing the 3 other second place teams, right? Whereas, the Rams are going to have the hardest of the 4 because they finished in first place. So they're playing other division champions. Now, what's interesting about her projections on NFL.com is she has the Seahawks winning 8 games, but then she says, based on most of the projections, the Seahawks have a good chance to start 5-2. So then she's saying they're going to go 3-7 the rest of the way. And I know it's not her, right? She's just plugging it into the computer and then describing to us what gets spit out on the other end. I find that interesting, that they would have the Seahawks getting worse as the season goes along. So let's get into this. And I put together a couple of bullet points just to show you some of the parameters that I was trying to keep in mind as I went through week by week and kind of looked at some of the numbers, some of 2024's numbers, which are sometimes difficult, more difficult than others with some teams, with all the roster turnover to project into 2025, coaching staff changes, but also travel, what teams are doing the week before they play the Seahawks and vice versa. But these are 4 factors that I kept in mind, and all of them led me to be as optimistic as I could be about this schedule. I told you last night I felt good about it, that I think compared to some of the schedules the Seahawks have had over the last 4 or 5 years, I find this one to be very, very favorable. Some of that is luck of the draw, obviously drawing the AFC South and the NFC South. Those are both weak divisions, which is why all 4 of the NFC West teams are in the bottom half of the league when it comes to strength of schedule. But some of the things that I like about this schedule and led me to err on the side of positivity in making these projections. It's very balanced. There's a great pattern of alternating home versus away. I think through their first 7 games, it's a straight alternate. It's straight up alternating. There are only 2 instances where the Seahawks play back-to-back road games, and even those I don't think are as difficult as some of the back-to-back road games they've faced over the last couple of years. So that's one of the things. Also, the degree of difficulty in the opponents they face, the teams they're playing, those seem to be spread out. Which kind of, I didn't really put these maybe in the right order because he jumped down to the third point there. That results in there's really no murderer's row or gauntlet on this year's schedule where you look at it and go, oof, that 5-game stretch is going to be tough. Last year was like that. In the last third of the season as we got into late, November into December, very, very difficult. That was when, squeezed in the middle of all of that. They played the 49ers twice in a 3-week period. There's nothing like that this year where they're playing 4 or 5 elite, big-time teams all in a row. So those 2 things go hand in hand. Love the week 8 bye. It's about as good as you can expect to get. You want week 8, 9, or 10, ideally. Try to split the season in half as much as you can so that you can recover. Maybe that lines up well with, for example, Riley Mills, the 5th-round pick out of Notre Dame, the defensive lineman who's most likely going to start the season on the PUP list, coming off that ACL injury suffered in January in the college football playoffs. The team said, they hope to have him back by mid-season. Maybe that's a perfect opportunity there where you can add him to the mix coming out of the bye. And then the rest factor. Seahawks are always going to travel as much or more than just about any other team in the NFL. This year, they're 3rd in total miles. But they luck out in the sense that they don't have any of the international games, none of the overseas trips, and what that can do to a player's body. But even regarding that, and shout out to Brian Nemhauser, Hawk Blogger, this morning for posting these stats. But there are analytic sites that go through and they weight all of this. Not just how many air miles you fly, but Sunday night games going into the next week, a Sunday game into a Thursday game, a Monday night game into a Sunday game. Any factors that shorten the rest and the recovery period for those players. Last year, they were bottom 5 in the league. I think there were 9 instances last year where teams were coming off either a full bye or a mini bye, having played on Thursday night, their game before. So they were coming in to play the Seahawks in a more advantageous situation because of the rest. This year, they are top 5. So the schedule maker is a little more kind to them this year when it comes to that. And I think all those factors just line up with being able to navigate a schedule. And Mike Macdonald got a lot of praise last year for this and how he coordinated practices and how he got them ready for road games. Obviously, that paid off. They went 7-1 on the road last year, just 3-6 at home. However, that needs to be fixed. And I just think when it comes to preparation, I think he's a guy that's kind of next level, just really, really smart and thoughtful about how he puts those things together. I also, when I went about doing this compared to other years, it felt like I didn't intentionally set out to do this, but I felt about halfway through this schedule that I was starting to see a pattern. And what I mean by that is, I think in years past with Pete Carroll-led teams, we could almost always count on a couple of letdowns every year, losing a couple of games that they had no business losing. But then Pete was so good at getting teams to bounce back from those performances. And so you would have to kind of factor that into your seasonal predictions. Where's the letdown going to be? Where's the game nobody thinks we can win that they're going to bounce back and play really well? I think Mike Macdonald teams are going to tend to be a little bit more even keel. There might not be as many of those trap game type elements that we have to worry about. Not getting too high, not getting too low. I think that really showed up in their preparation going on the road last year and doing so well there. And some of those road games coming off stretches where, they had a couple of disappointing losses at home and they had to bounce back on the road. I think that says a lot about his preparation as a head coach. So let's get into this. And what I'm going to do, let me change the background here for a second. All right. So here we go. This is blank slate, right? blank canvas. What kind of artwork are we going to create from this year's schedule? So they get to open again at home against San Francisco. This is a rare treat. A divisional game to start the season is rare enough. Only the second time since 2015 this has happened. Of course, they opened at home 2 years ago against the Rams in 2023. That was a loss. Have to go all the way back before that to 2015 when they opened up against the St. Louis Rams. So not a typical start to the season. And again, I'll just give you my thoughts in case you didn't see the reaction last night. Some people don't like this, and I understand why, right? You want to ease into it before you get into the division games. I think about it in terms of the college football season, which someday we may end up at in the NFL, right? If we get rid of the preseason altogether at some point, where you would want to start off with a game against James Madison, for example. Don't know why they're the first ones that popped into my head, but just as an example. So you want a soft landing, right? The 49ers are, here they are. Most people are thinking they're going to get back to that 9-10 win level and challenge the Rams for the division title, and you get them right off the bat. I'm okay with it, right? I say, bring it on. Bring me your best right off the bat. And also, I think in years past, some of the key divisional games have been way too deep into the schedule. Last year's a good example with the 49ers. Didn't play them until the second half of the year and then played them twice in a 3-week stretch. That just didn't make sense to me. We've always tended to play the Rams or Cardinals early in the game, but I like this. Let's just get right off the bat, week 1, let's give these two teams a chance to maybe send a statement of, hey, Rams, we're coming for you. Let's try to find out right off the bat who's in the better position to challenge the Rams in the NFC West. So opening at home is cool. You get to build up that momentum all offseason, right? And all the conversations about the crowd noise and the poor win-loss record last year, 3-6 at home. That's something that sticks in Mike McDonald's craw, John Schneider's craw, the players. They want to establish that. It's going to be a huge talking point throughout the rest of the offseason, as it has been up until this point. And so I think you're going to get, now there's the new ticket policy. We'll see what kind of impact that has as people starting today, now that the schedule is out, season ticket holders, as long as you have your invoice paid, you can start selling or trading tickets. And so that's a factor, or could be a factor. Seahawks have done well opening at home. It's their 4th straight year opening at home. They've won 2 of the last 3. They're 6-4 overall in their last 10 openers. What's interesting to me about this matchup coming out of the gate in week 1 is sort of the juxtaposition of the two franchises and where their rosters sit. The 49ers are going to come into this with a lot of continuity on offense, right? For all the concern there among their fan base about the offensive line and how they haven't really addressed that in the last couple of years. They'll come in with that basically the same starting offense that they had last year. Up front, Christian McCaffrey, presumably healthy, coming off an entire healthy offseason to rehabilitate. There's a chance Brandon Ayuk may be in the lineup. They're holding out hope that he'll be back from that severe knee injury. Don't know what you're going to get from him. How close to 100% is he going to be? No Deebo Samuel. It'll be the first time facing him or facing a 49ers team without Deebo Samuel in a while, other than games that he missed because of injury. So their offense should be ready to roll for the most part, while on defense, massive changes. Robert Saleh in as coordinator, and all of those draft picks early in the draft devoted to defense, right? Mykel Williams, Alfred Collins, CJ West, Nick Martin. There's going to be a lot of guys up there that they're going to be counting on. They're going to be starting and playing key snaps next to Nick Bosa, playing their first game in the NFL, playing it on the road in a hostile environment. Now, the flip side of that is the Seahawks will come into this game with all sorts of continuity on defense as well. All 11 starters back from last year, 14 players who started games. You add DeMarcus Lawrence to that mix. You add Nick Emenwari to that mix. So a lot of continuity. Be able to pick up where they left off last year, that defense that played so well in the second half of the season. While on offense, there's going to be a lot of unknowns and a lot of newness, new scheme, new coaching staff, new play caller, new offensive line coaching staff, new starting left guard, potentially a new starting center. Cooper Kupp instead of DK Metcalf. We'll see how the running back room shakes out. New blood in the tight end room. And so, it just flips it around. Seahawks offense, when they're on the field going up against a Niners defense that's going to have a learning curve and take some time to come together. And if everyone just assumes that Robert Saleh is going to be some magic elixir that's going to immediately magically transform that defense day one and make them good, I would look at a couple of things. Look at Mike McDonald, his first year as defensive coordinator in 2022 in Baltimore. They weren't all that good the first half of the season, and then things clicked. Look what he did last year in Seattle. Same situation. Robert Saleh inherits a defense with lots of changes. No Dre Greenlaw, no Talanoa Hufanga any longer. Those guys left in free agency. All those young guys I mentioned up front. His first year, Robert Saleh's first time in San Francisco as defensive coordinator, 2017, 18, 19, 20. By his second year, they were 13th in the league in yards per game. By his third year, they were second. And his final year there before he got the head coaching job at the Jets, they were fifth. But that first year, 24th in the league in yards per game. It took a while. And they had talent. They had Armstead and Buckner and Earl Mitchell and Sheldon Day and Solomon Thomas and Tony McDaniel and Elvis Doomerville up front. They had some guys in the secondary that could play too. There are questions this year. All those young guys up front and then some questions in the secondary. Renardo Green in his second year. Is he going to be ready to be cornerback one? Trey Brown, the former Seahawk, signed there in free agency, is expected to start at one of the other cornerback positions. And their safeties, very young. Jair Brown entering his third year out of Penn State. Malik Mustafa, who was in their draft class in 2023. So all of that being taken into account, and I am going to predict that the Seahawks will win their home opener against the San Francisco 49ers to begin the season 1-0. Now, one other reason that I chose to make this a win for the Seahawks is because for all of those questions that will exist on offense, going up against that very young, new San Francisco defense, go back a year to Clint Kubiak's first game calling plays as offensive coordinator in New Orleans with an offensive roster that had a lot of uncertainty, right? You had the veteran quarterback in Derek Carr, but, not really sure what you were going to get from him or the match there with he and Clint Kubiak. You had Alvin Kamara in the backfield, certainly, but how much tread was he going to have left on the tires as he gets to, that 30-year-old kind of cutoff where running backs tend to lose some of their juice. They also had a reshuffled offensive line that had been an issue for years. Now they had Eric McCoy and Cesar Ruiz at center and right guard respectively, but they were plugging in a rookie in Talisi Fuaga out of Oregon State at left tackle, shifting Trevor Penning, their former first-round pick, who had been considered a disappointment and even a bust by many, over to right tackle. And then their starting left guard last year was Lucas Patrick, guy the Seahawks looked at this offseason, but someone who is a journeyman. I've always kind of compared him to Evan Brown, who's in Arizona now. Of course, we had him in Seattle here for a year, but not a lot of question marks there on the offensive line. And yet they started the season scoring 47 points against the Panthers and 44 points against the Cowboys. Say what you want about the Panthers, but that Cowboys defense was expected to be pretty darn good. And how'd they do it? They ran the football, 370 yards total rushing in those two games. And then they married it with an efficient passing game, 440 yards over two games for Carr in those. Not a lot of explosive plays, really. He just kind of got it done. 5 touchdowns, 1 interception, very efficient performance from him. And so if you're concerned about that offensive line being able to go week one, there's an example. If Kubiak had those guys ready to go, so we'll see if he can repeat that in Seattle. So you get to week 2, they go on the road for the first time, and we get to see our old friend DK Metcalf in Pittsburgh in what is going to be a very, very interesting Pittsburgh Steelers team. Now, we are assuming that Aaron Rodgers is going to be playing quarterback, and so that will be a huge question mark looking at week 1 for them, certainly, and how he performs. But also just how long it takes that offense to come together. They, too, have a very young offensive line. A lot of young guys that we like, guys that we looked at the last couple of years in the last few drafts for the Seahawks, with Zach Frazier out of West Virginia at center, Mason McCormick out of South Dakota State, a guy that I know a lot of you looked at in the draft a couple of years ago. We talked about him a lot on the show. Troy Fatanu is expected to be back from that knee injury, the former Washington Husky, to play right tackle. So a lot of newness and a lot of youth there on the offensive line to go along with a new quarterback and a new number one receiver. And outside of DK Metcalf, now that they've traded George Pickens, not a lot going on there. Robert Woods listed as wide receiver 2 on that roster after all these years. He's basically become a journeyman at this point in his career. But that defense should be ready to roll. I mean, you add Derek Harmon to Keanu Benton, who was a draft crush of mine last year, really wanted the Seahawks to take him. Cam Hayward still up front with those two guys. That's one heck of a trio. TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Patrick Queen. You add Darius Slay to the secondary to go along with Joey Porter. Like, that's a defense, and I think that's their home opener. They will be ready to roll. There will be lots of excitement. That crowd will be going crazy. I think the offense will be just good enough for the Steelers in Pittsburgh to eke out a win. Could be ugly, low scoring. Could be one of those games that's a real early test for the offensive identity and how Mike McDonald, Clint Kubiak say that they want to play on offense. The reason that he and John Benton and Rick Dennison, all those guys were brought in to lead that offensive coaching staff. Could be a lower scoring game, kind of a slugfest, and could come down to who runs the football the best. So we might see a whole bunch of Caleb Johnson, the young running back out of Iowa that the Steelers drafted this year, to essentially take the place of Najee Harris, who left in free agency, signed with the Chargers. So 1-1 to start the season. Week 3, not a lot of analysis needs to go into this one. New Orleans here in Seattle. Kubiak facing his old team, right? But I think the bigger storyline, it's a homecoming for Kellen Moore. Really, really cool story. He grew up in Prosser, Washington. Of course, his dad, Tom, coached the Prosser Mustangs. They were a dominant football program there for a long time. One of the most fun things I ever got to cover in my broadcast career working in the Tri-Cities was covering those Prosser football teams and getting to know Tom. And remembering Kellen Moore running around as a 7-8-year-old ball boy at those practices. And then he goes to Boise State, has the record-setting career there, and now gets to ascend to the position of NFL head coach. I just think there's too many question marks on that New Orleans team, and in particular, Kellen Moore he'll be coming here with the Saints team that's going to be led by a young quarterback, no matter who it is. Most likely Spencer Rattler or Tyler Shuck, who they drafted in the second round this year out of Louisville. I think it's probably Shuck's job to lose. But even if it's Rattler, I think you come back home, you're coming off a loss, that home crowd's going to be cranking up again, outside of the Moore family, who will travel over from Prosser and probably try to bring as many people as they can with them. And so I don't think this one's going to take a whole lot of thought. I don't see a whole lot changing between now and then that would prevent the Seahawks from being an overwhelming favorite to win that game. So then you get into your first primetime game of the year at Arizona, Thursday Night Football. I hate seeing an Arizona trip so early in the season because it really wastes the opportunity to get away from the misery of what is a gray, gloomy start to the winter in the Pacific Northwest and get a break by traveling to watch them play in the desert. Got to do that last year. I think it was the first Sunday of December, if I do recall. In fact, on September 25th, sometimes in the Phoenix area, it can still be pushing 100 degrees. But here's my thought on this one. As much as the Seahawks have owned the Cardinals in the last 7 or 8 years, I think they've won 7 out of 8. And they've played really well in Arizona. I don't think they've lost in Arizona since 2021. I'm just, this if you watch me, not a Kyler fan. Don't think he's special. Don't think he has that it factor. Every single year, people seem to be willing to buy into some sort of, next step that he has in him. I just don't see it. They're going to be really, really young on defense. I like the talent they've added there, but incredibly young. And that's a defense that last year just didn't have much at all. And so to expect them to be ready week 4 to be dominant if not even competent, might be a little bit of a stretch. They opened with the Saints and Panthers, so kind of a soft opening from them. In fact, Cynthia Froyland says that they have the best chance of anyone in the league to start 2-0. And then they play the 49ers the week before the Seahawks. So they might be kind of flying high coming into this game. All the offseason buzz, they're already one of the darlings of the offseason, expected to take a step and challenge for the division title. Some projections have them finishing ahead of the Seahawks in the NFC West. And it's Thursday night football. I think it's a big opportunity for them. I think it's one, even though they play the 49ers the year before, they've struggled so mightily against the Seahawks the last 4 or 5 years. I think this is going to be one that they circle on the schedule. Thursday night football, that's a chance for us to make a statement. I'm going to give this one to the Cardinals. And then I'm going to give something away in the process. One of the other sort of have-tos that I set for myself heading into this exercise is I think the division is going to be so competitive that I think it's reasonable to think that the entire division is pretty much going to split with each other. And so obviously things can change. None of this is set in stone. But that's the part of this exercise that I set for myself as a rule. They're going to split all of their division games. It's just a matter of which one. And I just think there's a chance with this one where the Cardinals, they tend to get off to these good starts, and then they get a lot of excitement around them, and then things tend to fall apart. I think they could be flying pretty high coming into this game, and I think they'll take advantage of that and get a win. So the Seahawks start 2-2. And at this point, maybe some fans start to freak out a little bit. Maybe we're talking on the show about what a disappointment 2-2 is. Well, it's going to be even more disappointing when they lose at home to Tampa Bay in week 5. And this was a tough one for me. I think coming off a disappointing loss and coming off a mini bye, you get the little extra prep time and rest time heading into week 5. It was really tempting to chalk this up as a win for the Seahawks. But again, this kind of fits into another rule that I'd set for myself, which is at some point along the way, there's got to be a game that you expect them to win that they're going to lose. There's an even more notable one in the second half of the season we'll get to. And then they're going to win a game that you don't expect them to win as well. This is just one of those where I think Tampa Bay is going to be a really good team. I think they head into the season with as much roster continuity as most teams coming off the offseason. They've added some pieces, but there were no big overhauls there. I think the offense is going to be really efficient. We saw how good it was at the end of last year with Bucky Irving taking over kind of as running back one there. They've got some really good pieces on defense, especially up front. They got some playmakers on the back end. I think Baker Mayfield, the big question about this team is how impactful is the loss of Liam Cohen going to be as the coordinator? Obviously, now he moves on to Jacksonville. He's a head coach there, succeeded by Josh Grizzard, who only served as 1 year's passing game coordinator under Cohen. So a very inexperienced, has never called plays at the NFL level. How much of an issue is that going to be? I just think that Tampa Bay offense, the offensive line's really solid, especially if they get Chris Godwin back from injury to go along with Mike Evans. Like that could just be a team that rolls into the season and is hitting on all cylinders to start. And so that's why I went with this win. Also, just in a general sense, all the young players on the Seahawks roster and all the changes on offense, I do think, week 4, week 5 is when you see things start to kind of level out in the league. Teams that get off to unusually good starts that you're not expecting or vice versa. This is where kind of talent tends to rise to the top. The better coaches get a hold of their teams. And I think that defense for Tampa Bay is going to be really, really good, and the offense is going to be efficient enough that maybe this is just a game where you catch a young roster and an offense that still needs to build some cohesiveness And the better team, the more talented team, the more experienced team comes out on top. This wouldn't be a lot of fun. Sitting at 2-3 after 5 weeks. Like, man, the critics would be coming out of the woodwork. I can just picture the folks that sit behind me and have for years in the stadium, season ticket holders. And some of them are very reactionary, very overreactionary. And I guarantee you, I would be hearing some, Mike McDonald stinks. We hired the wrong coach. We should have kept Pete. Especially, my goodness, can you imagine if the Raiders are off to a 3-2 or 4-1 start at this point? Like, the criticism will be significant and not a lot of fun to talk about on this show. There's going to be panic at this point. But then it all turns around and the Seahawks are about to go on a run. It starts on October 12th, my birthday. It's a very significant birthday where the first number of the 2 digits increases. Not all that excited about it. But I am excited that there will be a game on my birthday. And the plan at this point would be to be there in Jacksonville. Be kind of cool. In October, that is an opportunity to get away from, at least cooler temperatures in the Pacific Northwest, go get some tropical weather. But this is an easy bounce back win. I think this is when, Mike McDonald gets to get after it and challenge his team. And maybe at this point, there are some lineup issues where maybe someone else needs to step up and take someone's spot. Some of the young players that maybe needed a learning curve the first 4 weeks, maybe things start to click here in week 6. And they bounce back strong in a 10 a.m. East Coast time road game, and they take care of business against the Jaguars, and they get back to even at 3-3. And then they come back home and they play a very good Houston team that's projected to win 9 or 10 games by Cynthia Freuland's model as well, with a good quarterback and a lot of talent. But the Seahawks continue. They build a little bit of momentum now. They were down. They were pissed off. They lost 2 straight. They're pissed off they lost a home game. And this is a chance to come back on Monday Night Football and really grab that atmosphere at Lumen Field. Coming off a win on the road. You straighten some things out. And now heading into the bye, knowing you can let it all hang out, you end up at 4-3 after the bye. How would you feel about that? When I first did this exercise, I'll peel back the curtain just a touch. I had him at 5-2. I had him winning that Arizona game to go to 5-2. And I originally did that because they've always played so well in Arizona. And I just don't think the Cardinals are ready for prime time yet. But then, sticking with the idea that they're going to split within the division and trying to almost force myself to be as pragmatic as possible, I went ahead and made that a loss. So 4-3 at the bye, how would you feel about that? And all that momentum that they built up heading into the bye comes to a head in the culmination of a Sunday Night Football win at the Washington Commanders. Now, a couple of reasons for this. One is I just think this is the point in the season where things start to click and come together. And we've seen a history of this with Mike McDonald. As I mentioned earlier, his first season as defensive coordinator back in Baltimore after his 1 year at the University of Michigan took about a half season and things really clicked. And that defense was pretty dominant the second half of that season, certainly the next year after that. We saw that last year, albeit with some lineup changes involved there. You bring in Ernest Jones, you get rid of Terrell Dodson and Jerome Baker, you install Tyrese Knight, you change out your inside linebackers. There were some other changes as well, but it was just when things started to click and really get dialed in. I expect that to happen around this time on offense. Health aside, and you can't take injuries or projected injuries into these predictions. You have to assume everyone stays healthy. But that offensive line, if you have continuity there, 7-8 games into the season, running that scheme together, that's when some things click. And if they aren't clicking by then maybe you make a little lineup change. Maybe you make a change at center or right guard. And I just think headed into Washington, coming off a bye, whereas Washington comes off a Monday night game 6 days prior against the Chiefs. Seahawks have more time to rest, more time to prepare. I am a tremendous believer in Jaden Daniels, but I think there are some other questions on that team as well. We'll have to see how the offensive line comes together. They got some guys coming back off injury. They've added to it. Laramie Tunsil now in at left tackle, but they're hoping Sam Cosmi gets back at some point this season. They're an excellent guard. And then some questions on defense. Of course, they made all those changes in the defensive line the last couple of years. I like what they've done since Adam Peters took over. I just think, at some point, again, they're going to win a game that people aren't expecting them to win, and I think this is a prime opportunity for them to get one of those. Then they come back home. They get the second shot at the Arizona Cardinals. This is kind of a revenge game for the Seahawks. They are going to take care of business at home against Arizona. They're going to ride the momentum of that win over the Commanders. They're going to be pissed off still about week 4, losing that game on Thursday Night Football in Glendale. And the Cardinals are coming off a short week. They play Monday Night Football again that week. Second week in a row, the Seahawks will be facing a team coming off a Monday night game against the Cowboys. The Seahawks get back in the win column here against the Cardinals and keep things going. So 4 straight wins now to improve to 6-3. So everyone who was freaking out at the bye probably feeling a lot better now. Until they go to LA and lose to the Rams, this one will be huge at that point. If the Seahawks are 6-3, you have to expect the Rams are probably 7-2-ish without looking in a detailed way at their schedule right now. But I just think headed down there for the first time, if you're going to split these games, it just made more sense to have us winning week 16 Thursday Night Football at home. We'll get to that in just a second. So they drop one to the Rams, but then they go right back. They go down to Nashville and they bounce back against a very young Tennessee Titans team. This is going to be really interesting for a number of reasons. Of course, our old friend Tyler Lockett, one would assume would be an important part of this offense, even if he's not receiving a high volume target share. Just the influence he's going to have on the young receivers down there and on that young quarterback, Cam Ward, the former Coug. That's going to be interesting to see. But I just think it's a young team in transition. They're just not going to be ready yet. The Seahawks are going to be, again, coming off that loss to the Rams, wanting to get things corrected and get back into challenging for the division title, if not the playoffs at worst. And that's a win in Tennessee against the Titans. And then they come home against the Minnesota Vikings, and who knows what this team's going to look like. Like, we expect that defense to be really good. Another year under Brian Flores, tons of talent on that side of the football. The offense, they remade the interior offensive line with some veterans, but we just don't know how the quarterback situation is going to look. I'm a believer in J.J. McCarthy, but how is he going to be 10 games, 11 games, 13 games into his first year as a starter, assuming he is healthy at that time? If he's not, are we facing Sam Howell in week 13? It'd be really interesting to see. Love me some J.J. McCarthy, but he was a very, very young quarterback coming out. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for things to click with him. And then again, the Seahawks stumble against the Rams. They're trying to stay in this race. We're in the home stretch. Things are heating up. It's a chance to take care of business at home. It's Sam Darnold facing his former team. It's, we dropped this game at about the same time on the schedule, a little bit later at home on the late pass from Darnold in a game that we thought we had won with 4 minutes left. So maybe there's a little bit of a revenge factor there. They get another opportunity and they take advantage of this one and they beat the Vikings at home. And so that, at the moment, then improves them to 8-4, feeling pretty good about things. I would imagine at worst, they're probably second in the division at that point, challenging with still a shot, knowing you've got the Rams and 49ers still ahead on your schedule to possibly win the division. But then you stub your toe. And I said there would be another one of these games. There's one every year. You go to Atlanta. It's another 10 a.m. game, which hasn't been an issue for quite some time in Seattle. And certainly going 7-1 last year, Mike McDonald did well in his first year of getting the team ready to play road games. It just feels like there's so much talent on offense for that Falcons team. Michael Penix now will have essentially the equivalent of a full NFL season under his belt as a starter. He's got Bijan Robinson. He's got all those receivers to throw to. They spent a bunch of resources on that defense to finally add to the pass rush, even though I don't love the process. I don't love how they went about doing that. It's something that's been a gaping black hole on that Atlanta roster for about as long as the offensive line has been for the Seahawks roster, and they addressed it aggressively this offseason. I just feel like that you're going to lose a really disappointing game at some point to a team that you don't think you should lose to, and so I chalked this one up as that. Fortunately, you get to come home and make yourself healthy against the Indianapolis Colts. Who knows what this team is going to look like, but I suspect that the quarterback situation is not going to be solidified, whether it's Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones or maybe Riley Leonard by this point. Who knows? It's if this team, barring an unsuspected, outstanding year from them, where they themselves get to December 14th and they're in some sort of playoff race, we're going to be talking about the GM and the coach being on the hot seat here, and everything could really go off the rails for the Colts. And if it goes badly enough, this could be a team that with 4 weeks left in the season is looking at the possibility of having the first pick in the draft next year. And so I just think it's a really good make-good game for the Seahawks coming off the disappointing loss to Atlanta. You come back home, you take care of business against the Indianapolis Colts in advance of the rematch against the Rams. Thursday Night Football, the final home game. All sorts of things on the line, and the Seahawks get it done in the rematch. Taking care of the Rams on a short week at home. They don't have to travel, so you get the Thursday night game. You get the quick turnaround, but you get to do it at home, whereas the Rams in that game coming off playing the Lions the week before. So I think it makes a lot of sense in this instance that the Seahawks come back and they earn a split of the season series with the Rams. Then you go to Carolina and you win it. Right? The Panthers, Dave Canales, we'll see our old friend there. Dan Morgan, the GM, good friend of the Schneiders, or good friend of John Schneider, came up through the Seahawks front office. Just, again, another team that's not ready yet. They should be able to run the football pretty well there with Chuba Hubbard and that offensive line and all the investments they made on the interior. They just have too many shortcomings on that roster. And again, I think this is a situation where now the Seahawks are going to be on the verge of the finish line. They're going to be able to see what's in front of them. This will be their 11th win on the season. You keep that momentum going. You come off the mini bye after playing the Rams on Thursday. And this is where it got really tricky. So we're sitting there. It's week 18. They're 11-5. Right? It's still hard to do the math with the 17 games off the top of your head. But what did I promise myself at the beginning of this exercise? They're going to split within the division. I just think that's the most realistic way to try to accurately predict what their record's going to be this year. And even though if we're sitting here, you want to fast forward and hop in the DeLorean and shoot ahead to early January where they're sitting there on the verge of playing the 49ers, and it's, time TBD, could be a Saturday, could be a Sunday game, then we're absolutely going to be on this show talking about beating the 49ers and finishing with 12 wins and maybe even winning the division. But as you take the 360-degree view heading into this exercise, I promised myself splits, so I've got them dropping a game to the 49ers. Now, as I sit here today and I try to project the division, and we'll do that whole prediction at another time, I'm going to have the Rams winning the division. And so it's quite possible that losing to the 49ers in week 18 really it won't cost them a playoff spot. If you win 11 games, you're going to get into the playoffs. That's just how I see this season going. It obviously might cost you a seeding if the 49ers are also at 11 or 12 wins. Or maybe this win gets them to 11, very similar to what happened with the Rams last year, and then they win on a tiebreak. Or maybe not. It could be meaningless. It could be a situation, and let's hope this is the case, where the Seahawks can drop that game and it doesn't mean a thing when it comes to their seeding. I don't expect that to be the case, but this was just the most realistic way. Now, if I wanted to be super optimistic, then I could say, okay, they win that game because there's so much riding on it, so meaningful. It's not really a true road trip. It's just down the coast. And they finish with 12 wins. I wanted to find a 12th win. I could have easily chalked up that Atlanta game as a 12th win, or the first Arizona game, have him sweeping the Cardinals. I just think that that's a little bit unrealistic. So my prediction, final record, 11-6. And again, as I said, I wanted to find a way to make it 12-5. That's the record as I sit here today, that it just feels like a 12-win team. They won 10 last year with a severely flawed offensive line and offensive scheme. No help for the tackles, not enough play action, wouldn't stick to the run enough, no hot routes, no escape hatches built in for Geno to get out of slow developing plays. Things that I think this offense is going to give them an advantage with this year. Plus the defense starting out of the gate, much, much better. A unit that I think we know what they look like now. We know what the floor is. And I think the floor is they're a defense that's going to be able to keep them in every game they play. The ceiling is they could be a top 5, top 6, borderline dominant type defense, especially if some of their young players take some steps forward. So I wanted to get to 12 wins, but I guess keep this in mind if you're sitting there right now thinking, oh, Dan, how could you do this? This is a 12-win team. Get them to 12 wins. I had to force myself to try to be realistic with this. And this kind of makes sense to me. I see this as a 2-year plan. There's still so much newness, and there was so much overhaul done on the offensive side of the ball that if it works, and you know how I feel about it, I'm bullish on it. I think it's going to work. I think by the end of the season, the offensive line discussion is going to be less significant. I think we're going to feel good about the offensive coaching staff moving forward. And I think heading into next season, we're going to have the look of a much more balanced team and one that will be on the verge of really being able to contend. And you head into next offseason with cap space and a bunch of young players still on rookie contracts. You extend the key young ones that are up for extensions either this year or next offseason. And as much as any year that we can recall in the last 7 or 8, I think you head into next offseason just needing a couple of key pieces or one more year of development, and then we can really take a step. Now, compare this to how you all feel. I ran a poll, and this is what it came back with. 65.7% of you, a full 2/3 of you, think that they're going to win 11 or 12 games. So right in that same sort of pocket. Only 8% of you think they're going to win 13 or more. 25% of you think they're going to finish either 9-8 or 10-7, sticking with the pattern that we've seen over the last 3 years. And 2% of you actually think they're going to win 8 or fewer games. I'd be really interested to hear your reasoning behind that. Now, I did get one of my regular viewers, listeners, a regular contributor in the live chats, did his own prediction. Just saw this on Twitter. Glad I did, so I can put it up here. Josh DeHuman did kind of the same exercise, just a little bit more casual in the artwork. He's got the Seahawks winning those first 4, starting off 4-0 and going 6-1 heading into the bye with just the Tampa Bay loss at home. And then he's got them dropping 3 coming out of the bye. So at Washington, the home game against the Cardinals, and then at the Rams. The sky would certainly be falling then if they came out of the bye and lost 3 games, and then winning 6 straight: Titans, Vikings, Falcons, Colts, Rams, Panthers, before losing that last game against San Francisco. And so he has them finishing 12-5. Nice work, Josh, on that. So that's it. What do you think? Where did I get it wrong? Where did I get it right? Throw your predictions down in the comments. Always love to see your engagement. And really, that's the best way to support the channel. You can subscribe, you can hit that bell to like the video, or you can share it on any platform. That really helps tell YouTube that you like what I'm doing. And they're going to take that into account. That works into their algorithm. They're going to push that video out to more potential viewers. The more people are demonstrating that they like the content. Also follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. And if you want to donate and help support me as a full-time content creator, all the different ways you can do that are linked down below in the description as well. Join me tomorrow. We're going to talk wide receivers tomorrow with Max Toscano. You saw him on the show before the draft. He writes the Remember the Tight End Substack, which is so great. And many of you came back to me after that interview and expressed to me that you learned a lot about the game that day. Max is really, really bright. He also covers the Cincinnati Bengals for SI, one of the up-and-coming bright young content creators out there. We're going to talk wide receivers. He did a study recently, he did a thread where he talked about how receivers don't necessarily have to be complementary in style, meaning you don't have to have a true slot guy. You don't have to have a true X. Those players can coexist and even thrive if they have similar skill sets. And that obviously applies to what's going on in Seattle right now with Jackson Smith and Jigba set to be wide receiver 1 coming into the season with the way the roster currently sits, and Cooper Kupp being added to the mix, a guy that at this point in his career is going to play more in tight splits and play more over the middle of the field as yet another slot. And there's been some question about whether those two can coexist and thrive in this offense. Max is going to come tell you why they can and why more teams are kind of throwing the idea out the window that you have to build a basketball team in your wide receiver room. So that will hit tomorrow. Anything big that comes up news-wise, I will react to over the weekend. And then join me for Sunday Night Live. We'll do another live show on Sunday night and just kind of recap the offseason up until this point and get some Q&A and just chat with you guys. So best way to know what's happening, hit that bell. That way you're always notified of new material. Forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching, you guys.